Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you chose to join us today. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope I see some hands in the chat box. And I apologize in advance. I didn't realize my chair was quite so squeaky, so I'll try to be as still as possible. I'd like to just make this a rather informal conversation. I am not an expert on interviewing, but have worked with aged populations and populations that have special needs. And so what I'd like to share with you today are just some tips, some resources, and understanding of the impact of some of the physiological and psychological changes that occur as we age, and how as professionals we might be able to adapt ourselves to the needs and desires of our clients that we are trying to serve, especially those who may have been victims of crime. I'm going to go ahead on and get started in terms of the 5 senses. So starting out with vision. For those of us who are of a certain age, we have a spare set of readers that we keep handy or have to keep on at all times. And that is one of the changes that comes along in vision as we age. And as you'll see there on the slide, that the vast majority of older Americans age 65 plus experience a significant vision loss. 1 out of 6 older Americans age 70 plus have impaired distance visual acuity, which is talking about the sharpness and the clarity of their visual field. And many times we have difficulty reading small print and seeing well in dimly lit locations, which can be disadvantageous for older adults. Some of the more common eye conditions that occur in older adults is presbyopia, which is simply the fancy name for the hardening of the lens. The lens of the eye does not have the flexibility and the fluidity that it once did, hence the need for our bifocals to help us be able to read the fine print on items. Next is age-related macular degeneration, which is a visual impairment and visual loss, which affects the central vision. So unfortunately, individuals lose the vision in their direct head-on sight, but they do maintain peripheral vision. And this, of course, runs along a continuum from mild AMD to very severe vision loss, leading to blindness in some instances. Cataracts, another eye change that we're all very familiar with, is simply a clouding of the lens. Once again, the lens of the eye is affected in many different ways. And cataracts many times will cause the individual vision to be blurry, to be fuzzed, to feel like they have a film over their eyes. And unfortunately, for many people, it has to get pretty bad before the cataracts is quote unquote what they call ripe to be surgically removed and implanted with an artificial lens. And cataracts can occur in either one or both eyes. But once again, as you can well imagine, an individual's field of vision is compromised. Another vision loss is diabetic retinopathy. And as its name implies, this is a condition that you find very commonly, unfortunately, among diabetics whose blood sugars are not well contained. And you will see this vision change or loss in individuals with both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. These individuals will encounter what are called floaters, dark spots, and actually sometimes they will be described as like little miniature strings. And that literally is part of the vitreous humor that bathes the eye that has actually broken off and is floating. So once again, as you can imagine, with that kind of description, it is a very difficult visionary loss. And glaucoma, for those of us who go to the eye doctor, it's that little puff of air that they place in your eye, which actually measures the pressure on the optic nerve. Glaucoma is one of those diseases that can be controlled for if caught early, but is also one of those very sneaky and insidious kinds of eye vision losses, because it is very, very gradual that an individual may not even realize to what degree or impact that their vision has changed. So some of the things that you may want to take into consideration in terms of tools and techniques to use, especially for those who have very significant visual problems. Based on the person's field of vision, you will want to position yourself in the best possible way for them to see you and interact with you based on what type of vision that they have. Ask them where you should sit for them to see you best and what is most comfortable for you. Make sure that you're not in front of a window if at all possible, because it can cast a shadow or a halo around you. Nor do you want to be in a room that has glaring overhead lighting or a shiny wax floor that is reflecting back. And any items that you may want the individual to review, such as photographs, written documents, you want to make sure that you are able to place those at a comfortable eye level. Some of the devices that may be able to assist you in this area, you will see to the left there of your screen are colored sheets. And these sheets actually will help illuminate and bring out the print on a page that can be helpful for an individual who has to read a document. And to the right, you will see a handheld magnifying glass that the individual may use to enlarge words and text when they have to read. Or this is actually a tool that you may want to consider having in your toolkit in terms of interviewing individuals who may have some physiological challenges. And the items in the lower half, the item to the far left is also another type of amplification or magnification device that can be placed over written documents for them to be seen by the individual with limited fields of vision. And the items to the right also are tools that can be used that will actually be able to read the spoken or read the written word rather to the individual who has visual impairments. Next is hearing. Kind of like the old Verizon commercial, "Can you hear me now?" Presbycusis, once again, one of those fancy words, but it simply means the loss of hearing that we all encounter as we grow older. Hearing loss, as you see, is the third most common chronic health condition reported by older adults. And it can occur in both ears and affects them equally. And as we go older, the propensity for that hearing loss also tends to increase. Hearing loss is not always fair as it relates to the genders. Unfortunately, gentlemen experience hearing loss more frequently than women. And in particular, they lose many times the ability to hear the S or the TH sounds. Those two diphthongs are very crucial sounds in the English language. So as you can well imagine, the inability to be able to distinguish between those sounds can lead to a great deal of confusion or perhaps miscommunication. Since gentlemen's hearing loss happens more frequently, it happens primarily because we lose the sounds in the hearing in the typical auditory range or in the higher sounds. And in the higher ranges are typically women's voices, the shrill sound or the trilling sound of a telephone, and even the chirping of birds as examples are some of the higher octave ranges in which hearing loss can be experienced or observed. Another piece of hearing that sometimes we kind of overlook or forget about is that our hearing is also part of our balance system. So it contributes in many instances to falls. And so in terms of abuse or other considerations of maltreatment, it may not be that a person is being physically harmed by another, but it may actually be an undiagnosed hearing loss. So any of you who have ever had a very bad earache, you know that your equilibrium is off and your gait may not be as steady as you typically experience it. Some of the tools that you may want to consider when you're conducting an interview or having a conversation with someone who may be hard of hearing is that you want to make sure that they see you. So you want to perhaps stand in front of their face or very near them, Let them know that you are speaking to them, call them by name, and make sure that you have their direct and undivided attention. Also give them time to focus on you, to attend, to switch gears of what perhaps their personal thoughts may have been, if you are coming up and speaking to them and they were alone, if they were watching TV or something of that nature, so that they can switch gears, so to speak, so that they are mindful of what it is that you are getting ready to share with them. We don't want to make the mistake of shouting or yelling at folks, but you may indeed have to raise your voice slightly in order for an individual with a hearing loss to be able to hear you better. Using short, simple sentences is helpful. And in particular, if you know or you think that a person may be lip reading, you want to make sure that your face it stays open, that is not obscured in any kind of way. And also, once again, making sure that you have good lighting, not casting shadows over your face. And for all means, controlling your environment as much as possible and removing any distractions that you may be encountering in the environment. And asking the person, is there somewhere that we can go that may be more conducive to our conversation so that we might be able to hear one another better? So drawing the person into the process is always helpful. The individual may actually ask you to speak into a hearing aid type of device called a pocket talker, or just simply sit closer to the individual to hear so that they may hear you better. Also, hearing loss is along a continuum. We know, of course, that some individuals may be born who are deaf, may have certain degrees of hearing impairment, and then some individuals lose their hearing later in life. So throughout the course of their adulthood, they have been part of the hearing community. And now that they have hearing loss, they still may use their spoken voice. But because they do not have the feedback of hearing their own voice, the clarity of their speech sometimes is not of the same quality as it was previously. And by all means, once again, sitting closer and asking the person how you may best interact. A lot of times I think we're a little bit shy to point out a person's differences, but in most instances, the individual is more than happy to let you know how you can best interact with one another. As I was mentioning, for those of you who have never seen one before, this is an example of a pocket talker. Sounds fancy, but as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. It typically consists of a set of headphones and a small handheld device that will have a microphone. So it is an amplifying device. So the headset goes on the person who is hard of hearing, and you hold on to the amplification piece so that you may be able to converse with the individual. Some other devices, technology is wonderful, as seen here today, that we are able to conduct this conference virtually. Our speech recognition programs that can be loaded on all types of devices, everything from laptops to tablets, actually to your cell phone. And you will see several of the programs there: Dragon, Pedis Ava, and then Sprint Relay, which is something that has been around for many, many years in the deaf and hard of hearing community, where it is a two-way system where the person with a hearing impairment is patched through a relay center and is connected to a hearing person, and their information is transcribed back to the hard of hearing individual through rich text devices and telephone typewriter, TTY, which is kind of going out of style, but some older adults who may have been had hearing loss over a lifetime may be very familiar with that. And there are a multitude of wonderful services that are on the market that you can avail yourself of that will be able to help you when you are dealing with individuals who have hearing loss. Touch. As we age, our musculoskeletal system changes dramatically. So the way that our muscles and tissues and tendons and ligaments all match up with one another change over time. And so we want to make sure that we are taking care and are considering the needs of an older adult and what their special conditions may inquire or require of us as we conduct those interviews. One of the major things that changes over the course of the lifespan is the way our skin interacts and responds to our environment. And one of the most noticeable areas is the skin loses elasticity. And just to give you a little example, a little interactivity, if you just put your hand out in front of you and take your other hand, your forefinger and your thumb, and just gently grasp the skin on the top of your hand, pull up gently, and then just relax and let go. For those of you who may be a little bit younger, the skin dropped back very quickly rather. For those of us who may be a little bit more mature, it had a more of a gentling, subtler effect. But that's just an easy example of how our skin may lose elasticity and how it does not quite snap back as it once did. Another factor in changes, particularly with the skin, is that our skin becomes thinner and more susceptible to cuts and bruising over time. And this is the gateway many times, unfortunately, for pressure ulcers to occur. And these typically will occur at the bony prominences on our body. So areas such as our elbows, our knees, our heels, our ankles. So that is why it's very important for individuals who are particularly bedbound to be able to be turned at prescribed times during the day so that these skin breakdowns, tears, and lesions do not occur for those who may be in long-term care settings, for example, or who may be in the home setting, but once again, may be bedbound. Another indication that is very unique is that the older adult may not realize the severity of a particular injury, of a skin tear in particular, and it may just not register with them because the sensation, the tactile sensation, has become more and more limited. We also start to lose the ability to regulate the distinction of heat and cold as we once did. For example, we may be in a room that we find very comfortable, but for the older adult, they may be very chilled. And many times they may be embarrassed to say that they are chilled or that they are cold when everyone else seems to be so comfortable around them. But this is an opportunity for us to be very mindful of what types of nonverbal communication the older adult may be experiencing and may need to have a sweater. They may need to have a blanket placed around them, even when we do not feel it. Their circulatory system has changed and makes them feel the heat and temperature changes more dramatically. Another part of the tactile loss is a reduced sense of touch and feeling, and it makes it very difficult many times for older adults to have a good ability to grasp, pick up things, and placement of objects. So many times you may hear older adults say, I just can't seem to hold on to anything, I'm so clumsy. But it is not that they're clumsy, it's just the changes in their tactile sensation. Another area that is impacted, as you can well imagine, are the hands and an individual's ability to write. It becomes much more difficult for many older adults to write legibly and to be able to manipulate writing instruments, whether that be a pencil, a pen, or a stylus. They find it much more difficult because of arthritis and other circulatory changes. We want to ensure the individual's comfort and concentration. So when you are going to have someone become seated and you're going to interview them, you want to be mindful of the type of chair that you are sitting them in. One typically with a high back with good support, and armrests are going to be very beneficial to them for their ability to enter and exit a seated position safely. You're also going to want to be mindful of the length of time that you spend in a seated position. Once again, the temperature of the room, and be cognizant of the need for a break in the conversation, as well as the potential need for restroom breaks, which may be a little bit more frequent for older adults. And also to be mindful of the writing instruments that you give them if a signature is required for various documents. Here are some additional tools that, once again, are very reasonably priced that you may want to consider and utilize. To the left there, you will see basically what is an elevated clipboard. This is beneficial for the individual who may have dexterity problems and being able to raise their arm to sign documents. This also puts it on an angle, which ties back to anyone who may be having some difficulty with their visual acuity. It gives them the opportunity to grasp the item as well in order to place their signature. And you will see to the right and to the bottom left, there are grips that an individual can put on actual writing instruments that will steady their hand, and in some instances actually weigh it so that their hand does not shake. And once again, they are able to apply their signature readily. Taste and smell. I kind of consider those the twins because they are so intricately intertwined. Most tastes are directly linked to odors. And as you can see, we have over 10,000 taste buds, which are linked to sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. But even though 10,000 sounds like a lot, once again, we do start to lose many of those taste buds as we age. But sweet and salty are some of the first sensations that people kind of notice in decline. Folks will start adding more salt to their food because they say it just doesn't taste the same, as well as sweetness. They just don't have that same sensation that they are accustomed to, and will add additional or extraneous sweeteners to their food. The sense of smell is very strongly hardwired in the brain. Any of you who have experienced a stuffed up nose and you had a head cold, just nothing tasted right to you. You just really didn't even feel like eating. Your appetite was off. And that can be problematic because it can lead to weight loss, unexplained weight loss or unexpected weight loss when nothing smells good or nothing tastes good to the individual. It's also an opportunity for the potential for poor personal hygiene because the individual's sense of smell is not as keen. They may neglect personal daily hygiene, or if there are incontinence issues, they may not be aware that they are not putting forth their best personal selves. And it may be miscues for self-care, which leads into self-neglect, which is one of the largest areas of elder abuse, is self-neglect. Many times we think of the physiological changes, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, but self-neglect is one of those key areas. So we always want to be very mindful of other plausible explanations as to why we are seeing dramatic changes in an older adult. Switching gears a little bit, but kind of in the same realm in terms of areas that are challenging for the interview process, are speech impairments. They range anywhere from a lisp to a stammer or to a stutter to much more profound difficulties in the spoken word. One of the most taxing and most dramatic areas is for an individual who has had a stroke. And so any of you who are familiar with an individual who has had a stroke, many times language can be dramatically impacted. And three types that are the most common are Broca's aphasia, which is also known as expressive. And very often the individual will leave out words like is or the, and they will have difficulty understanding sentences. They will also have difficulty following directions. They will try very hard, but it just does not register or resonate with them. They know the word that they want to say, but have a very difficult time recalling it. So for example, they may call something a car when in actuality they mean a truck. They know it is a four-wheel automated vehicle, but they can't call it by the proper name, but they know that it's close. So they use the closest word that they can think of in their repertoire. The next one is Wernicke's aphasia, which is often referred to as receptive aphasia, and the use of the wrong word, made up words. An example of that they might call a fork a gleeble which makes no sense, which is a made-up word. And many times in their efforts to communicate, they will string together a series of meaningless words that sounds like a sentence, that sounds like what we consider traditional conversation or speech, but it really does not make sense. And then last is just global aphasia, which is a stroke that has dramatically impacted typically the left hemisphere of the brain, which is where language and communication is housed. So individuals who have global aphasia will also have difficulty forming words and sentences to make themselves understood. Other language difficulties that are along this spectrum are disorders such as agnosia. The individual cannot recognize everyday common objects, faces, or places. Anomia, they may not recall the names of everyday objects. And many times because of the disease process that has occurred to them, they will have a short attention span, sometimes visual and spatial problems that make it difficult for them to orient themselves in time and space, as well as a condition called perseveration, which is the repeating of the same word or movement even after the question has been asked and you have moved on to something else. It's almost like a fixation where they're caught in a loop. They're still trying to communicate, but find it very difficult to do so. Some of the tools that you may want to consider for speech impairments may be actually what is called a picture board. Very basic, as you see here before you. On one column, they actually have printed words, and on the second side, you see printed words also with pictorial representation. And the individual can make their self or their needs known by simply pointing to the different objects on the board, which actually can construct a sentence and is a way and a form of communication. So this is one that a in-home caregiver may utilize with an older adult or an adult with a disability as it relates to bathing and personal hygiene for the day. The second picture board refers to mealtime, a person's personal preferences and what they may need to be able to handle a meal setup.
Thank you.
Other individuals who need special considerations and tools to facilitate communication. As you all can see coming across the screen, those are all forms of how to say hello in various languages. Hola, Spanish, bonjour in French, Nosotros is Hmong, Laotian, and I can't do the last one, but it is Russian as well for those of you out there who are linguists. And so this is just a representation and a reminder that we live in a global world now. Our country is changing, the landscape is changing very dramatically, and we have individuals from all types of countries and cultures and backgrounds. So we have to keep in mind that these individuals are also aging in place. Many times we think of it in terms of younger people coming to our country, but older adults also immigrate to the US and or have aged in place. So when we're dealing with individuals who have been victims of a crime or experienced a traumatic situation or occurrence, they may actually have been very well versed, very fluent in English for many, many years, but due to the traumatic injury as a self-protecting mechanism, they may revert back to solely using their mother tongue. And so this is something that you may want to know in advance and keep in mind that you may actually need a translator to go along with you to conduct that interview. I think all of us who have done interviewing and case study and management know that it is not recommended to use family members as translators due to the nature of the topics that are being discussed and a natural desire to protect their loved one from additional trauma from having to relive that event or cause greater angst. And the flip side of that same coin is that that may not be the best individual to use to translate for you, because that individual unfortunately may actually be the perpetrator. We also want to be conscious and respectful of cultural norms that can negatively impact your interview or the outcome of your conversation. And some of the things to keep in mind along this realm are gender, age, eye contact, and proximity. So depending on the culture, it may not be appropriate for an elderly lady to be interviewed by a gentleman, because in their culture, that is a moral dilemma, that an individual who is not part of your immediate family be in close proximity to you. Age is another factor where a very young person interviewing an elderly victim of crime may not be seen as competent, even though you are more than competent, you are a professional doing it. Just being cognizant of there may be some age bias on the behalf of the victim, actually. Eye contact is another cultural norm that sometimes we take for granted or don't even think about. In Western culture, we very much are big on direct eye contact. And in other cultures, this is not the case. In fact, a direct eye contact is seen as an affront or a direct challenge. And in terms of showing deference or respect for another individual, it may be a downcast look or a look away. Proximity is also another one. In very Western culture, we have what we call our personal space, our personal zone, and we have different realms of closeness. So being aware of that and picking up the cues of the individual that you're talking with will hopefully give you a little bit of insight as to how to put that individual at ease. And last but not least, it's very important to remember when we're working with clients who may be coming from different cultural backgrounds, different countries with different political setups, when a crime or negative action takes place, law enforcement may not have been the first choice for individuals to reach out for assistance or remedy. Therefore, those individuals may have had a lifelong reluctance to engage with law enforcement or other entities of authority who may provide protection or may have to step in and intervene in what are many times considered very personal family affairs. So just being aware of some of those nuances, some of those being very subtle, others being very dramatic, I think will go a long way in terms of your interviewing and your case management working with clients. It's not what you say, but how you say it. I'm pretty sure many of us grew up hearing our mothers or our fathers say that. And actually, a lot of times we do a lot of talking, but actually words only make up about 15% of our communication. The vast majority of our conversation and communication setup is actually 60% nonverbal and 25% being that intonation. So that inflection in your voice, that pause in the conversation is what sets the tone for how that conversation is going to unroll. Another population that you may not have thought a whole lot about in terms of communicating or working with them directly or having to have special consideration are individuals who use wheelchairs. A person's wheelchair is really actually an extension of their personal space, and it's very intimate to them. It is something that is part of who they are. And just a few key tips. You never want to push a person in a wheelchair without asking first, particularly if they have a manual wheelchair, because their fingers may literally be down near the spokes of the wheel and you inadvertently pushing them forward to help get them to a more conducive area may actually break or badly damage their hands. Many wheelchair users are very independent. They can transfer from their chairs to beds, cars, or with little or no assistance. And if they are doing so, you never want to interfere with anyone who has an assistive device, whether it be a wheelchair, a walker, or a cane. So anytime if you have to, for some reason, move an assistive device out of the owner's reach, make sure that once they are ready to move about or ambulate again, that they have ready access to their assistive device. Moving more so now to kind of the cognitive and psychological changes that occur as we age. Individuals who have intellectual or developmental disabilities are another specialty population that it takes time and effort and preparation in terms of conducting their interviews. Individuals who have these types of diagnoses are typically diagnosed early in childhood and before they each reach the age of majority in many instances. And the condition adversely affects their activities of daily living, at least in three areas that make their day-to-day interaction more difficult. Some considerations when we're interviewing individuals with ID or DD is a self-assessment. So gathering information about the individual. How do they respond best? What are some of the best vehicles to communicate with them? How do they like to communicate best? And preparing the interview area is very crucial. Once again, in terms of making sure that there are minimal distractions in the area. But if there are also, by the same token, if there are things that bring the individual comfort, making sure that those items are readily visible and accessible to the individual. As in any interview, we're going to start out with basic introductions, taking the time to build that rapport and establishing that sense of confidence in the individual. Need to be prepared for answers that may not seem accurate or clear, and they might not seem to be on point with what you asked. So it's always a good opportunity to kind of circle back around and restate the question, but to use concrete language and try to use the same language that you had asked before and give the individual time to process that information. And of course, as always, be on the lookout for distress or discomfort. One of the caveats in terms of interviewing individuals with developmental disabilities is that in many instances, they will very much want to be pleasing to the interviewer and want to have the right response that they think the interviewer wants to hear. So be certain that you let them know that it is okay and that you expect them to share their concerns using their words, and that you do not want to influence what they have to say, that you are there to listen and learn from what they want to share with you. Cognition is the way that we accumulate knowledge over a lifetime. It's our ability to process information and using all of our five senses and the stimuli from the environment around us as to how we make decisions and act upon them. And cognition comes in and takes many different forms. One of those forms, of course, being memory. Memory also has various gradations, and certain aspects of it decline as we get older. Many times we will have greater difficulty on focusing and remembering and attending to certain information. Our procedural memory remains stable over the lifetime. And for example, procedural memory might be how you brush your teeth. So we remember those steps in what we call kind of rote memory. Working memory, however, is one of the areas of memory that we do see greater and more noticeable decline in the ability to pull and recall information that has been registered with the individual based on their experiences. Along these lines, we will see changes in language comprehension, how we're able to retrieve that information. The information is still there. It's the processing speed that changes over time, and the capacity to lead to problems in understanding complex sentence structure. It may seem kind of strange over the course of a lifetime, life experiences. You would think that the older adults' vocabulary is rich, and in many instances it is. but the complexity of sentences and the way that older adults many times changes, and it's harder for them to keep up with new information. Older adults also tend to use less grammatically complex sentences. Our long-term memory and recall often remains unchanged, but some forms of long-term memory, such as names, can be tricky. So names, dates, and places may be somewhat problematic when you're interviewing an older adult and needing to pinpoint down exactly when a set of circumstances happened. But if you give them enough time, they will be able to recall that information. You may have asked the question, they may not have been able to answer you thoroughly at that point. And you say, well, that's all right, we'll come back to that a little bit later. And you've actually moved on to the next question. Perhaps a moment or two later, they will come back with the response to the previous question. So just be aware of that you have to kind of go with the ebb and flow of the conversation, that the older adult is very often very attuned in you, and they are still processing information and trying to keep up with that information to be able to recall that and share it with you. For individuals who have forms of dementia or other cognitive changes, one of the techniques that has found great success in being applied is called the talk method. T, take it slow. The A, ask simple questions. Limit reality checks. Once again, the response that you may receive for the individual on the surface does not seem to kind of coincide with anything that you are discussing. And so you don't want to hinder that conversation. What they're communicating has meaning, but it may take us a little bit more digging and discovery as to what it is that individual is trying to share. And then keep eye contact. This is a key and crucial component of keeping the individual engaged with you. And they are, once again, picking up on your nonverbal cues if what they're saying is registering with us and if it is the information that you are seeking. Some other considerations and communication strategies for individuals who may have dementia is, once again, very similar to individuals who have hearing loss or vision loss. Approach from the front. And this is important in the individual who has Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, because as we said, they are aging. So you have multiple body systems that are being compromised. But one of the things that remains strong throughout the lifespan course is the flight or fight response. So if you enter up on an older adult and they do not see you very well, they cannot hear you very well, and you startle them, they are going to have an involuntary reflex. And depending on where you are in proximity to them, that could be a punch in the stomach, it could be a hit to the head, anywhere that they are able to strike out because you have enacted that startle reflex. So making sure that they see you before you even approach and engage can be very important. You want to introduce yourself so that they have a frame of reference as to who you are and why you are there conversing with them. Once again, using simple sentences, simple word structures, and words and terminology that the person is going to be familiar with, that they use in their day-to-day lives, is going to be very helpful. And also, once again, the nonverbal, expressing a relaxed body language and minimizing the distraction in the environment, because many times distractions will take you completely off course of what can be a valuable and meaningful conversation. Just some final considerations for interviewing. Kind of putting it all together in a holistic manner for what we need to do in order to have meaningful interviews and conversations with older adults, particularly those who have been victims of some type or some form of abuse, is ensuring their comfort, that they know that they are in a safe space, that they are able to share freely, that there will be no penalties for the information that they divulge. Looking at the physiological need, Making sure the person has eaten and is well hydrated is very important. It seems pretty obvious, but you would be surprised at how much of a difference it makes if the individual has not had their breakfast or not had lunch or has not had anything to drink in a significant amount of time. This dovetails very closely to the next piece, medications. If the individual has not had their medications for the day, they may not be at their ultimate best to interact with you. Assistive devices, if you know the person wears glasses, or if they have a hearing aid or another device, before you even begin your conversation, make sure that the individual has those things readily accessible. Older adults are just like all of us. We're creatures of habit. So we want to try and avoid any conflicts with the elders' daily schedule, anything that will throw them off kilter, that will be disruptive to their day and make them less inclined to work with you, are things you want to keep in mind. So knowing the best time of day, or what could be the worst possible time of day to conduct an interview, will save you a great deal of frustration. And last but certainly not least, recognizing and anticipating that there will be some distress from the older adult, particularly in terms of abusive situations, whether it was a result of physical abuse, whether it was financial exploitation. The individual is going to experience stress because they are going to be embarrassed, ashamed. They don't want to cause any trouble. They don't want to ruffle any feathers, so to speak. So there's going to be a degree of hesitancy. So being able to put that individual's mind at ease will go a long way in being able to rectify any type of situation that has occurred to them. I like to use a bit of a mnemonic in terms of the challenges of what it takes to interview individuals who do have some special considerations that we need to take under advisement. And that's simply in the form of patience. Putting yourself in their shoes, looking at the situation from their lens. What does it look like looking from the inside out in their perspective? Accepting that communication will be hard, it will be difficult. Taking your time. If you do not have the time that it will take to conduct one of these interviews, then you need to kind of go back to the drawing board and reconfigure your schedule to be able to make sure that you can do it in a timely manner that is going to be conducive to that older adult or that disabled adult. Include them in the process. This is something that I know as social workers, members of law enforcement, the health community, that we all hold near and dear. But many times we kind of slip into what we call elder speak. Sometimes we actually talk down to the person, not intentionally, but it's just something that sometimes creeps out. And we need to be very cognizant of that and include them in the process because they are adults. Even if they have cognitive disabilities, they have something to share. And that's where encouraging them to tell their own story their way is so crucial, using their own voices so that they can be heard. And it's also important that we nurture their healing and courage. It takes a lot for them to reach out to say that something has occurred, something has happened, and I need help. Comfort is also crucial. Comfort the individual themselves who may have been victimized and their loved ones, because many times the two go hand in hand. And in particular for individuals who may be in long-term care settings. This is often the hardest decisions that a family has to make in placing their loved one, and they hope that they have done the very best in choosing a facility for their loved one, only to come and find out that their loved one has been victimized. So helping erase feelings of guilt, shame, and fault are also something that we can play a crucial role in. And I just wanted to leave you with some state resources. The North Carolina Services for the Blind and the North Carolina Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing are two excellent state entities that you can readily avail yourself of. As you'll see there on the screen, there are district offices for the Division of Services for the Blind, and there are regional centers, but they cover all 100 counties in our state. And what is very useful and beneficial about them is that many times they will have many of the assistive devices that I've talked about, and many more that I wasn't able to include. And so before your agency may want to engage in purchasing of these items or devices, you can try them out just like you would check out a library book. So I think you might find those resources very helpful. And then also our national resources. So too many to list, but the Alzheimer's Association is a treasure trove rather, of information for working with individuals with dementia. Also our National Center on Elder Abuse, our National Committee to Prevent Elder Abuse, and then the Elder Justice Initiative, which are national movements. And as you heard Joyce Massey-Smith, our director of the Division of Aging and Adult Services, speak to this morning about the actual dollars that has been allocated to the prevention, the awareness of elder abuse, particularly in adult protective services, but also across the board in many other realms. Many of what you heard as our kickoff yesterday with the MDTs. So we are very excited that these measures are being given serious consideration and are moving forward, because our elderly population is growing tremendously and we need to be ready. And I hope some of the things that I shared with you today are things that you can use in your toolbox. And Pam, I hope I haven't run too long.
No, you're actually great, Kathryn.
Right.
Just a few questions. There was one, there are products such as vitamins for the eyes. Are they effective?
Yes, depending on what types of condition. If it is just some of the natural things that come along with aging, our eyes do tend to dry out, which can lead to irritation and inflammation. But the important thing is make sure that you are running that by your primary care physician, because if you're like most older adults, you're taking 5 to 6 other prescribed medications. And even though we just think of it just being eye drops, it does have actual prescriptive components to it that may be counterintuitive to other medications that you're taking. So always check that with your ophthalmologist as well as with your primary physician.
Okay. There was also a question about whether the PowerPoint and all would be available. I did share in the chat that it'll be on the website in cp3a.org. This session was also recorded, so it will also be available.
Wonderful.
We have a comment from Carol Kelly, such good points, so many are overlooked, etc. I have seen people interviewed who have had, well, I've messed up on here, had hearing loss and thought the person was demented. And yes, too many people baby talk older adults.
Absolutely.
All right, here's one more question. If eye contact is a societal barrier, do you have any other ideas in that talk, Akron?
I'm sorry, repeat that one.
If eye contact is a societal barrier, do you have any other ideas?
If you feel that you have offended someone by the way that you're interacting, are we able, I need a little bit more information to go on. Are we able to unmute our guests?
Let's see, Heather, let me find you here.
Or Heather, could you type a little bit, expand on that a little bit more for me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had that TALK acronym and the K stood for keep the eye contact, and you said that was most important. So I just wanted to know if you had other options that you could give us if that eye contact is a barrier for that person because of societal issues or their history or their culture, whatever, if you had other options.
Oh, most definitely. Once again, just being a good observer of the body contact. So if you were trying to engage with them in direct eye contact and you see their shoulders grow back, if you see them get rigid, then that's an automatic cue for you. Okay, hey, something is not going right. They are not perceiving me well. So then that might be a time that you try to change their attention, focus on something else, perhaps take a step back or act as if you're engaging in something. All of a sudden your water bottle becomes very interesting to you, something that will break that gaze, and whatever action you may have done inadvertently, totally unbeknownst to you, that it kind of breaks that tie so that the individual can refocus. That is kind of, to me, one of the sad beauties of dementia. Because of the cognitive deficits, many of the responses are very short-lived. And if you break that contact, go and do something different, change and redirect that attention, and you come back to it a short while later, it's as if it had never happened before.
Okay, let's see. We have one great, we've got a lot of great information, obviously. Thank you, Kathryn. It really was great.
Okay.
Let's see, what else am I missing? Enjoyed the presentation. Thank you all so much. I would like to hear more on how to handle these challenges when the interview are mainly done by phone.
That one is a little bit tricky, but kind of with the beauty of cell phone now, we can do video chat. So depending on if the individual has some hearing challenges, being able to see your face, even though the quality may not be 100%, it's not the same as obviously being there in person. That may be able to aid in the conversation if the phone interview is your primary source. But I would always suggest, if and when at all possible, that those interviews be conducted in person. Okay. I know that's not always possible, but that is usually going to be your best route, particularly with an older adult. And I think it enriches the conversation because it allows you to be able to have some visual cues yourself that you would not ordinarily be able to pick up in a telephone conversation.
All right. Well, Kathryn, thank you so very much for this presentation. It was fantastic. I would like to remind everybody to please stay right here in this session, and you will be taken back to the main room. And then you can just mute your computer or whatever and go to lunch, and then be back for our 1 o'clock breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.